In this PowerPoint deck, I am going to finish covering chapter 1, and then I'll do a separate recording for strategic marketing planning. I do want to give you one quick announcement. I've had a couple of questions about those who are assigned to a marketing plan project. Some students have asked if they do the marketing plan on the company that they also were assigned for the cases. The answer is no, not unless you want to. For the marketing plan, that is meant to be entirely separate. So it's for an organization of your choice. So it could be the same company. So for instance, if you had the King's Hawaiian case, you could, if your team wanted to, do a marketing plan for King's Hawaiian. You could, but by no means do you have to. So it's meant to be for an organization of your choice. So either it's a brand that you're passionate about is what I would recommend, or for maybe some of you who are working, maybe it's for one of your organizations. So it's really your call what company or organization you want to choose for the marketing plan. And the due date is to be later in the semester. So if you look back to the syllabus where it says the course projects are due, that's the due date for the teams who were assigned the marketing plan or for the teams who were assigned the Popular Press project. So all course projects are due on that date. The case dates are different. Those are due throughout the semester depending on the case that you were assigned. So I just wanted to clarify that because I did get a couple of questions, and so I wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. As always, feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions or if I can be of help in any way at all. So let's continue our discussion on relationship marketing. And we left off talking about the different types of relationship marketing programs that are commonly seen in the marketplace. So we have financial programs, which provide economic incentives to customers. So oftentimes we see these as, you might get gas points or dollars back or percentage off or some discounts, giveaways, some sort of tangible reward. And I think we talked about like Starbucks, free drink or something like that. So oftentimes airlines, hotels, many companies do this. And so they capture customers because at the end of the day, they're providing utilitarian benefits or those practical benefits to customers. So oftentimes customers stay because it saves them money, okay, right? That utilitarian reward. Now, social programs, on the other hand, are a little different. Social programs tend to include both personalization and customization of the exchange experience. And so this sort of personalization, customization can also stem from the social interaction between the customer and the frontline employee. And so this tends to trigger people to stay because it's providing customers with hedonic value. The social programs are creating social bonds, somewhat like friendships. If you tend to think about what a friendship is like, you tend to, at times, sometimes form friendships with frontline employees. And so you stay because you like how that company or that frontline employee makes you feel. You might feel known, or you might feel special. You might feel like a friend. And so it creates stickiness because of that sort of social bond, those personal ties, and that sort of psychosocial benefit the customer gets from engaging with that firm. Now, lastly, we talked about structural programs, and structural programs are different because they generally occur when the selling firm engages or makes investments into the relationship. And so it's usually a lot of work on the selling firm that basically creates this stickiness with the customer, that the customer now has very high switching costs. And so the customers tend to stay because it's inconvenient or costly for the customer to leave. And so this could be costly in terms of time, effort, money. And so the selling firm, oftentimes this is, let me say, used in the business to business world where businesses are selling to other businesses. And the selling firm might create like some sort of integrated technology with the customer, or some sort of customized dashboards for the client. There might be some sort of data sharing or workflow integration. And so many times you see this in the B2B world. And an example might be like that the supplier creates a just-in-time inventory system linking directly to a retailer's sales. And so when monitoring retail sales, it can instigate quick replenishment by the selling firm. So it also could be, another example would be when firms create like my account pages for clients that again are tailored to the client and somehow enhance the service delivery to that particular client. And so you can see it's really the seller is creating this sort of unique benefit to the customer that is very difficult to realize elsewhere. And in class, I think we talked about how Apple creates stickiness in that, all of their systems are integrated, that, you have everything synced between your computer, your phone, your iPad. And so there would be a lot of startup costs if you were to leave Apple and switch. So many studies indicate benefits of these 3 types of relationship marketing programs. However, I will say that the financial program tends to not be as effective because they can be easily imitated by competitors. It's easy for competition to control the price and control those sort of tangible rewards that come from financial relationship marketing programs. Now, if you think back to these different programs, and maybe you can think of yourself as a customer and how you maybe have experienced these different types of relationships with firms in the marketplace, why they're effective, and when you think about that relationship or the relationships that come to mind, there's a pathway in which these different programs lead to financial outcomes for the firm. So research tends to indicate that these activities, these RM activities, build relational assets, and you can think of them as building quality relationships. And so in these quality relationships, there are certain cognitions that come to mind on the customer's behalf, certain feelings, certain norms that drive customer behaviors. So the next stage would be relational behaviors, which in turn affect financial outcomes for the firm. So in talking about relational assets, you can think of these RM activities or programs driving or building strong quality relationships. And so a quality relationships tends to have trust between the buyer and the seller. And so again, I want you to think about this both from a B2B and a B2C perspective. So businesses selling to organizations and businesses selling to the end users or end customers. So that's what I mean by B2C. So in both cases, usually when you have a high quality relationship with a seller, the customer trusts the seller. The seller should in turn trust the customer. But there's a high level of trust. You believe there's integrity, that the seller's committed to your best interests. You tend to feel like you're committed to that seller, like you feel like a sense of relationship commitment, like you're just not going to leave tomorrow. There's a sense of reciprocity norms, meaning I do this for you, you do this for me. We help each other out. And so these positive norms guide the relationship. And then there's also a sense of gratitude. So gratitude is a positive emotion that occurs when a beneficiary receives a benefit or something of value from a benefactor. So in the customer's case here, the customer receives a benefit from the selling firm, and gratitude oftentimes stems from the belief that, the seller didn't necessarily need to do this, and they did it for my benefit. So that can even strengthen it further. And gratitude's important because this emotion has been linked, or is the emotion that's strongest linked to positive word of mouth. And so very, very important for businesses to elicit customer gratitude. So we can see these feelings, these thoughts, these norms, drive relationship behaviors. And so there's a variety of different behaviors that are beneficial to firms. They could be cooperative behaviors, like the customer is very flexible with the selling firm, or the customer is willing to share information. Going back to when we talked about structural programs, if you think back to your friendships, right, you tend to disclose information with your friends. And so information disclosure is a very important cooperative relationship behavior in long-term relationships with sellers, in that if sellers have a better understanding of your needs, your wants, your company's situation, they can craft something that has particular value for your firm. And also, the selling firm, if the seller is disclosing information to the customer as well, like, hey, we've got this upcoming sale, or hey, this is running late on, we're getting delayed on this, the more information that gets shared, oftentimes the better it is for both parties. And so cooperative behaviors include, information disclosure, reciprocity too, like that sort of cooperativeness that stems from the norms that guide the relationship, as well as, flexibility between the two parties. Relationship loyalty, favorite status. This could be things such as suddenly a need arises in the buyer, and they give the first look to the selling firm, meaning, when they go out to look at providers who can address the certain buyer's need, they go directly to that selling firm. So it's like first preference. It also could be last look. So maybe the buying firm had to get 3 particular bids. And I say this because oftentimes when working for organizations, oftentimes state organizations, there are practices or policies put in place that the buying firm needs to solicit a certain number of bids prior to making a decision. And typically the organization is forced to go with the cheapest bid. So in this case, an example might be that when there's a strong relationship, the buying firm might give the selling firm the last look and say, hey, these other vendors quoted me this. I know you originally quoted me this. Can you beat these other firms' prices? And I'll go with you. Okay, that's an example of a last look. And so that can happen in strong relationships too. We also have referrals like word of mouth or testimonials. Again, word of mouth is very, very positive and very beneficial to a selling firm because oftentimes it's believable or perceived as highly credible by potential or future customers. Empathetic behaviors could be that the customer kind of forgives the seller for mistakes that are made. They're going to sort of shelter their relationship or protect their relationship when there's service failures on the seller's behalf. Kind of giving the seller the benefit of the doubt is what I like to think of. And so in this case, they're, again, more likely to stay in the relationship despite there potentially being a service failure. And so that sort of, again, it gets back at that commitment and that trust and the reciprocity that it's like, yeah, mistakes happen, but we're willing to look past it and move forward. Now, a variety of financial outcomes stem from relational behaviors. And so these could be sales-based outcomes like sales growth, sales diversity, share of wallet. So that would be things like, if I put this in a B2B context, let's say you're in the market for insurance. Maybe you use the same firm for your home insurance, your auto insurance, your life insurance. And so you're getting a variety of different services from the same provider. Sales-based outcomes could be, the acquisition of new customers and retention rates as well. So anything that deals with sales and revenue, that could fall under sales-based outcomes. Profitability-based outcomes, these are things that deal directly with profitability. So thinking of sales less costs. And so it could be like price levels, how we talked about with loyal customers. Oftentimes they're buying higher margin products. And also, again, selling cost to loyal customers is lower because oftentimes these returned customers know what they want, they know how to use the system, they know what they're doing, and so there's less service costs oftentimes to your existing or long-term customers. Aggregate outcomes could be things like lifetime value. Again, what's the value of the customer over time? And it also could be return on investment measures too. So those ROI metrics might come into place there. And then lastly, we have knowledge-based outcomes. And so these are things like patents, time to market, new product success. Again, we talked about earlier models that linked, if I go back, linked to customer orientation or market orientation to firm innovativeness. And again, because in relationships, and again, getting back at that information disclosure, when selling firms really know their customers, which oftentimes stems from having these long-term relationships, they can create innovative products that meet or exceed the customer's needs and tend to do well in the marketplace. And so that's where, these knowledge-based outcomes, in particular when it comes to new product success, tends to occur. So just to recap again, this is an overarching relationship marketing framework that tends to show how these relationship activities build high quality relationships or relationships that have valuable assets, which in turn drive customer behaviors, and those customer behaviors in turn benefit the firm financially. Again, a variety of things going on here, but I want you to think, big picture in terms of why relationships or having existing customers is beneficial to firms. Now, lastly, I just wanted to touch on challenges in today's economy. Marketing's tough. It's not an easy, one and done type thing where there's equations and rules that never change. And one thing you've probably gathered in our discussions is that change is always occurring and marketers need to adapt. And so marketing can be very tough because you're monitoring the external environment, which you have no control over, but you have to adapt your marketing mix to align with customers' needs and these changes in the marketplace. So here are some challenges I just wanted to mention with today's economy. One is the power shift to customers. I want you to think for a moment how you feel like you have become more powerful as a customer throughout your lifetime. Just a couple of examples I can think of is, now we can record things. We don't even need to watch commercials. We don't even need to hear commercials through Pandora or through, like Spotify or things, right? We can upgrade our accounts to avoid and ignore any sort of advertising. And we also have a lot of power when it comes to shopping in terms of looking at where we can get the best deal for the same product, right? There are apps out there or just quick searches can show you where you can find the best deal. The internet has really changed much of how consumers engage in comparison shopping. Also reviews, the wealth of information that's out there pertaining to reviews that can help guide customers' decision making. Much of what the firm can't control. I think back to Yelp and some of these other platforms that really has shifted a lot of power to the customer. And also thinking about how one complaint can go viral. A customer can post something on social and the next thing you know, it just has blown up. And so many different ways technology has really shifted power to the customer in the sense that they can reject marketing or provide some really critical feedback to firms. Also, there's been changes in products and how we select products. And I think a good example is how there are less physical goods in the marketplace now. And think about how your phone has replaced so many things, such as a flashlight, a camera, a calendar, books, recorders, DVDs or CDs, your Garmin, right? I think back to those external GPSs that that several of us probably used to have. And so your phone has really replaced many different products and services. And we tend to be operating with less physical goods in our life. There's also been significant audience and media fragmentation. But, it used to be decades ago, just ABC, CBS, and NBC. And then, came cable and then streaming services. And so it's becoming more and more difficult for marketers to reach a mass audience like they used to. Because again, there's so much diversity in where or how people are obtaining their information. And I think a good example of this is like with news. The studies are showing that more and more people are not watching the news. They're getting it through social media and things of that sort. And so really there's been lots of changes in that industry. There's also been changes in value propositions and shifting demand patterns in terms of, customers want different things. And so, especially during the recession, that led buyers to focus on frugality and value. And so you can see how what they were looking for, if you think back to about 15 plus years ago, how that really changed what customers looked for and how the marketplace needed to adapt. And I think back to when fast food, was really, really stressing those value meals. Certainly they still stress them today, but, that was a little different back then. And Walmart really pushed McDonald's really pushed, their value menu. And then lastly, with shifting demand patterns too, I want to say that, again, this gets at this idea that customers are always changing. Like I don't walk into as many stores as I certainly used to. I rarely go into a bank. In fact, I can't remember the last time I walked into a bank. A grocery store I try to avoid because I love grocery pickup. Highly recommend it if you have young children not to bring kids in the store if you can. From my experience, that can create a bunch of problems. And so I love, drive-up orders. And so customers are demanding different things, just like how we talked about how, changes in happy hour are occurring and how firms, can't survive on just food sales. And so you have to adapt to these changes in consumption because otherwise your company won't exist anymore, or it's very unlikely that it would. And then lastly, privacy, security, and ethical concerns. These are, as technology has increased, and this too has led to a variety of different issues for firms like security breaches. You can probably think of many firms, maybe your own personal information was shared, but I can think of Target, Home Depot, Equifax, and many other firms that have had security breaches throughout, the past 10 years or so. And what they did for customers is provide, free credit monitoring and so forth. But, again, customers want assurances from companies that their information is safe and confidential. And so companies really need to think about not only how are we protecting customer information, but also thinking ahead to what sort of contingency plans do we have in place if there is some sort of breach. And to no surprise, if we look at the common complaints to the FTC, the most common complaints customers have are oftentimes number one being like issues with credit bureaus or credit reporting problems such as errors in the credit report. And then number two are complaints to the FTC over identity theft. And these identity theft complaints have shifted back and forth, between 1 and 2. Because it is, unfortunately widespread. And so again, companies need to think ahead. How can we prevent, but also what's our plan if, an issue were to occur? So with that said, marketing is not easy. Okay. We're living in a world with constant change. And there's no clear rules or rights oftentimes. And it's really never ending because, as we'll talk about in the next chapter on strategic marketing planning, that, as companies are monitoring their strategic plan or monitoring the performance of their marketing plan, they're constantly adapting and changing. Oh, if this isn't working, we need to adapt this, or this is working, let's do more of this. And so it's constant adaptation, and it's market planning is an evolving process. There's no definite beginning and no defined ending. Also, I want to say that customers can be really hard to predict. I think a great example of this is for you to think about New Year's resolutions. People say they're going to do something, but then they don't do it. Okay. Intentions don't always align with behavior. And so when we think about marketing research, and particularly survey or self-reported data, sometimes it can be really hard to use that data because it's not always accurate. For example, a customer may say, oh yes, I'm going to choose this green laundry detergent, or earth-friendly laundry detergent. But then when they actually go to the store, maybe they see the different price levels, or they see that, oh, Tide's on sale, they go with a different brand. And so again, intentions don't always align with behavior. So overall, this course aims to give you a deeper understanding of marketing and marketing planning. I know many of you have never taken a marketing course before, and this might be your first time you get exposed to it. And so my overarching goal is to provide you with an understanding of different areas of marketing and give you some exposure to the types of situations that marketers deal with.